What? Oh, folks, I love this one. Hold on. I got to check on the managed participants. I got to see if the student that sent me this one is on the call tonight. Where is he? Nope, he's not here. Okay. Son of a gun, because this guy cracked me up. He once I explained to him why he couldn't do what the seller wanted him to do, he goes, Charlie, or he says, Uncle Charlie, that's why I pay you the big money. Folks, here's the rule. This is the rule, and I always talk in rules. Here's the rule. Never enter into a contract that you might not be able to perform under. Always think about when a seller is coming back at you in a negotiation situation. Always think about, if I agree to what he is saying, can I always be able to continue to perform under the terms of this contract? And if the answer is no, then don't sign the contract. Don't do it. Okay? Now let's take a look at some of the things here. Now, in our purchase and sale agreement, in Article 10, there are two sections. There's the casualty and there's the condemnation section, okay? Hold on. I can tell you, folks, in all of my years, I have never negotiated this article more than I have with this particular student on this particular deal. Because this is kind of just a cover your ass section. In the event that the property gets taken by eminent domain during the acquisition process. That's not going to happen. And that's what condemnation is. Or condemnation is any type of government taking. Like if the government walks in and takes your house because it's disgusting, they condemn the house. If the government comes in and takes your house through eminent domain because they're going to put in a highway, they condemn your house. Okay? The house I grew up in was condemned. I like to tell people it was because my mother was not a good housekeeper. She hated it when I told that joke. I said, Mom, I'm only kidding. The house was taken because the neighborhood was taken through eminent domain. They put a highway through my neighborhood. The house was condemned. That's condemnation. Now, casualty is about insurance. Property and casualty. Casualty is insurance. So what we do is we put a provision in the contract to explain what happens in the event that something goes wrong on the property and it's no longer what you bargained for. Okay. Let me just check out these chat boxes. Is rule of thumb 25? No. Okay. Or it's in the way of a border. Harold, you stay close, Harold. I got something for you. All right. So let's take a look at this provision here for the Article 10, the casualty. And so this is what our standard wording is. And then I'm going to tell you what the seller wanted in their negotiations with my student. All right. And what I've done here is I've just highlighted the sections that I want you to understand. If such cost of loss or damage by a casualty is less than or equal to 10% of the purchase price, then the seller, at his sole cost and expense, can repair such damage as promptly as is reasonably possible. Okay, so there's our first test. Is it above 10% or is it below 10%? Now keep in mind, folks, we're under a contract here. We have to perform in a certain period of time. Who makes the determination if there's been a loss of 10%? It's usually the insurance company. But then after the insurance company comes in, then you go out and you hire your own insurance adjuster. And then he comes in and he argues with the insurance company. And that takes months. And so this goes on for a long period of time. All right, so that's the first section. Now, if the cost is more than 10% of the purchase price, then the seller or the buyer may elect to terminate this agreement within 10 days after receipt of the seller's notification that it was more than 10%. Okay, If it's more than 10%, you and the seller kind of come together and say, hey, listen, we got a problem here. This isn't going to work. We got to move on. So you make the determination at that point whether it's going to be more, whether you want to continue on with the deal or not. And then if you do decide to go on, what has to happen is the seller has to assign to you his insurance claim. So you get all of his insurance money. Now, what about his deductible? That's something you got to take into consideration too. Now, look at this last paragraph, this last highlighted section. Okay. Remember how I was showing you why we use my purchase and sale agreement? Here is another reason why we use my purchase and sale agreement. All insurance claims that are open on the property shall be completed prior to the closing. In the event that this provision is not satisfied, this agreement shall be considered null and void at whose option? At the owner forum member's option, and void upon the buyer's written notice. So if are any open claims of insurance on this property while the contract's going on, you guys get to walk. You can void the contract and I get my money back. Okay? There's another get out of free jail card. So what happened? How did this all come about? Let me just check the chat box. Let me see. Eminent domain. Let me see. I am currently interested in a property. I've heard through the grapevine that the city might be interested in that building as part of a city development. Would eminent domain be an issue? What should I be concerned about? Okay, Gertrude, listen. Amazing question because, okay, let's go back to my own personal experience. The house I grew up in was great house, great neighborhood, fantastic, great place to grow up. And we always had the sword of Damocles hanging over our head for 20 years. Because for 20 years, the talk was that that neighborhood was going to be taken through eminent domain, okay? All of a sudden, we had a young couple move in next door. And they moved in and they said, hey, we're going to start a family here. And this was like 6 months before the neighborhood was set to be taken. And these people come in and buy. And we're like, hey, did you not know what's going on in this neighborhood? They were shocked that it had never been disclosed to them that their house would be taken. So they ended up, actually what happened was their house was not set to be taken, and it still is standing today right next door to my house I grew up in. But what happened is because they took the 18 homes across the street from us, they decided, we're taking your whole neighborhood. We're going to let you, we'll take your house as well because it's not the same place you originally purchased. So these people ended up getting their house taken by the state as well because the state felt badly that these people found out late. So the fact that you think this could happen might be a problem for you selling your property in the future. These people should have been disclosed. That real estate agent should have been sued because they failed to disclose. But is that really their duty? That's the question. Each state's going to be different as far as the duty of care of a realtor as to what they need to disclose to a potential buyer. It's like, I love those true crime murder mystery shows. I also love the ghost shows. And there's a state that actually passed a law, actually several states, that if there's any ghost activity on the house, the realtor is responsible for disclosing it to the potential buyer. Okay, that came about because of a lawsuit as well. So it might have been the Amityville Horror, for crying out loud. So funny story about the Amityville Horror, but I'll tell you that later. So so you might have an issue selling that property if you know about it now, and because remember these city events may take 20 years. It could be next year. It could be never. It could be all talk. But if it happens during your watch, you might have trouble, selling that property. And I got to tell you, like my parents made out like a bandit in this whole thing. But not everyone makes out when they're selling back to the state or the city through eminent domain. So yes, Gertrude, it is definitely something that you need to be concerned about. You need to find out where they are in the process. Do they have the funding? Have the plans been drafted? I mean, are they already having neighborhood meetings about what's going to go on in that property? So definitely keep that in mind. Okay, so let me show you what happened in this situation. Remember my rule. If you can't perform under the terms of the contract, don't sign the contract. So here's what happened. The seller comes along and says, hey, I don't like the way you've worded this 10% or what have you. I want a $200,000 bar. So that if the loss is $200,000 or more, then you can walk. But if it's less than $200,000, you have to buy my property. No mention of insurance proceeds, no mention of deductible. This is what the seller wanted. So, can we perform? We're ready to do this? Should we sign this contract? Here's the problem. And this is how I explained to the student. I said, listen, you cannot sign this contract because if half of the property burns down the day before closing, they're saying you have to perform. Because who's going to come in and say it's more than 200 or less than 200? Because remember, insurance doesn't cover the land costs. They just cover the building. So how do you know that the loss of that building is more or less than 200? But more importantly, and this is what you always have to do, guys, you always, if ever you can, you blame it on the bank. The bank's not going to, if the bank finds out that the half of the property burnt down the night before, they're not going to close on that property. Their collateral is gone. So just forget it. You cannot sign this contract, move on to the next one. So the whole purpose of what I'm teaching you here today is never enter into an agreement that you cannot perform under. And in this particular case, the way that the seller has this drafted, because of the bank's requirements, the bank will never agree to this. The bank would not close on this deal. The seller, my client, the buyer, would have to perform. He would not be able to perform. He would lose his earnest money. Done. Move on to the next one.